What happens after we all go to take our dirt nap? This has been an argument for pretty much all of human history. In fact, wars have been fought over the idea, and even right now, there's a Reddit mod somewhere reading in some comments about how there is no God after someone made the mistake of posting a picture of grandma saying she's in heaven now. He would also like to show you his fedora collection. So now that we've lost the entire r/atheism community, it is a question we should probably ponder, because despite all of our technology and, well, let's be real here, minimal understanding of the brain, we aren't even sure how consciousness works really. We just don't know what happens after the lights go out for the last time. There are obviously religions that support the idea that after our meat suit is done hanging out in this realm, our souls will continue on to an existence beyond our comprehension, while others think that we are really just purely organic matter and we return back from whence we came. Honestly, it's a complete unknown.
It's the unknown.
That's what I've always found interesting though about anyone who says they know 100% what happens on either side of the aisle, because it's like, no you don't. These ideas will continue to be pursued by the human race until we know definitively what happens to us. Disbelief in the afterlife is as much as a belief as belief in the afterlife is. Always remember that. But what if we could bring somebody back long after they had already expired? And I'm not talking about minutes or even like an hour and 43 minutes like that youngling who fell into the ice and was resuscitated. I'm talking several hours or potentially even several days after they had already met their end. What would they say? What could be told to us about something beyond the veil? And would bringing somebody back violate a natural order that humanity doesn't even know about? In the events of the Lazarus effect, we are violating all of the natural orders, baby, as a serum is worked on to initially help doctors have more time to potentially help those who have suffered brain damage due to lack of oxygen brought on by their heart stopping or possibly even a stroke. This serum would be tested, but the results would not go exactly the way as intended. By rebuilding neural tissue, the serum was supposed to eventually clear out, but for some reason, even though they never really accounted for this, it remains, continuing to build the brain of the animal that has been revived. As one person is brought back, things go from crappy to, oh my god, she's crushing people's heads. But what exactly is happening, and is there potential concerning the idea of recovering from death? Let's discuss the cellular and molecular biology behind reviving any type of animal. And also, once this is posted, there's a really good chance this channel has already crossed 1 million subscribers. Thank you guys so much for your support. I never thought, just like everybody else, whoever makes it to 1 million, they're like, oh, I never thought I'd get it this far. It's for real. I didn't think I'd get it this far. So 900K to 1 mil, absolutely blew in terms of personal life, but from here, it's looking a lot better. I really do appreciate you guys, and thank you for joining me on this journey on this channel. But for anybody who's new, probably just clicked off already because I'm gushing about this, we're gonna move on. So we open up our story with black and white footage of something totally bodied. It's bacon. As they increase the omega, we can only be happy that they didn't increase the beta. Anyways, they shock the pig and then they get nothing. They then increase the glutamate and serotonin to shock it again, yet nothing happens. Upping the dosage of soy, the pig then comes back to life, freaking out before flatlining again. It didn't work, whatever they were doing, but it did work for 2 seconds. Not exactly a lifespan anyone would want, but it does show promise considering, you know, they were pretty much checked out for quite some time. As we watch the American Horror Story intro except in color, it appears that they're using like ferrofluid in order to regrow tissue. That's just an assumption, we'll see later. Also, this is future Roanoke. It's definitely not ferrofluid. Jumping over to Berkeley, California, I know, I'm just as disappointed as you are, we're in California. We head over to a university. We meet Dr. McConnell and a redhead named Ava. They throw an NDA at her, and we also meet Donald Glover, who is known in this movie as Nico, but it's Glover. There's no going back. The redhead is there to man the cameras, or at least woman the cameras, and record the doctors Frank Walton and Dr. McConnell as they welcome everyone to the lab. They really suck at interviews, you know, because they're like totally in love with one another. Whoa, like, come on, get it together. Allegedly, they have bonded B-cell tumors that sped up nerve fiber regrowth. Interesting idea. This created the Lazarus serum. Electrical charges then jumpstart the serum, which then forces the brain to reactivate by electrocuting certain areas. The point is to prolong the period where you can bring someone back and give medical professionals more time in order to try to get someone functional, which is, I mean, arguably it's a really good idea. So let's talk about that for a minute. Because we cannot just gloss over just this absolutely juicy cellular function, utilizing B-cell tumors is a pretty intelligent idea. In fact, the whole movie is pretty smart from what I can tell. Somebody did their homework. The B-cell tumors appear to influence the neural capacity of a human in terms of regrowth, but you're probably asking why. Well, it's commonly known by most people that the B cells are critical in the fight against pathogens in your bodies. When you are invaded by bacteria, viruses, or parasites, your body will fight hard with the innate immune system at first and ultimately, well, typically anyhow, destroy some of the invader. I say typically because our bodies are actually not all that great at fighting parasites. We just sort of live with them, and without them, that might be why we're seeing allergies on the rise in first world countries, because we get rid of all the parasites in our body that actually have an immune system calming effect. So as these pieces of the invaders are left over from the fight, a dendritic cell will then enter the battlefield and retrieve some of these pieces. Bringing them back to the lymph nodes, they will go from B cell to B cell, presenting this piece of the invader, and by complete chance, one of the B cells will actually have a receptor that is compatible with it, randomly based off physics. It will locate that one B cell that is capable of producing these antibodies, and then it's able to attach to the pathogen. From here, the B cell will undergo cellular proliferation and rapidly divide, releasing a ton of antibodies over the next few days. As your body is flooded with it, the pathogens are then covered and immobilized, and this is essentially activation of the adaptive immune system. This makes it easier for your immune system to then get a hold of the problem and overcome the infection. And this is basically the first line of thought, what most people know that B cells do. But did you know there are more functions than just this? And again, I have to give it to the Lazarus effect. Somebody did their research. It is known that B cells also have another function that falls directly in line with this movie. B cells are directly involved in the process of promoting neuron viability and dendritic arborization. This is, of course, meaning that B cells help promote neurons surviving and will essentially inspire neurons to branch out with dendritic portions of their bodies to make connections with other neurons. This neurotropic effect can actually prevent neuronal death in some cases, and B cells have been seen prevalently in areas of the brain, specifically after a stroke, interacting with neurons in an attempt to keep them alive. Now the question is, why are they using B cell cancers essentially for this job, and what's with the electrical shocks being administered? Well, we'll discuss that in a moment. So Redhead then tells the interns that she has no cell service, like, you're in a mega basement, gal. A sub-basement, if you will. A Discord admin's domain. It's like, of course you wouldn't have cell service down there. As literally the dude from American Horror Story, I think that's who's in this movie, his name is Clay, he's just one of the interns, is helping Lover around the lab, explaining things to Documentary Girl. That night, McConnell plays opera music, which now makes us realize she's probably going to be the villain. That is my official prediction. So as she sits down to begin testing, because, you know, scientists do nothing but work, it's actually true. Being a former scientist, it's a miracle I escaped the lab at all. Then again, I didn't really try hard to escape the lab. I will probably go back at some point, but as the cameras pan around the lab, everything is empty. Looking back, there's no reason why that happened. It's just, I think they were just trying to, you know, pad the runtime. So with her very dry, blaze at 420 eyes, she watches the tissue vibrating, as I'm assuming it's dead tissue that is moving once more, but as she sits there, someone takes the music off the record player as Glover scares the absolute crap out of her with a pig mask. Bro, stop that. See, what I find funny is, all these people are like highly intelligent, right? And movies try to portray it like there's some sort of social ability, but if you've ever really worked with highly intelligent people, you know their ability to interact is practically zero, and it has nothing to do with like a problem with them as a person. It's just an awkward, jumbled mess half the time. And if you're as social as I was, you can have a bad time. So Glover then asks McConnell how she's doing, and that shifts the mood, of course. You got the hots for her, my man? Evidently, when they got the grant, she had to put her wedding off with Frank as he became completely focused on his work and couldn't be interrupted. Glover then tells her maybe it's the universe trying to tell her something. Now, in the past, I too have had the chance to be this sly about this type of nonsense, but it is greasy. You just don't do it. Rise above. No, it's a bad decision to try to undermine somebody else's relationship and just kind of walk away from it. That night, as McConnell sleeps, she dreams about garbage in the middle of a hallway. Okay, well, I guess they're dolls, but you get the point. It's all on fire as she can hear pounding on the door before she wakes up. It is at this point I have to ask, what am I watching? Why would someone suggest this? Of course, someone suggested that I cover Piranaconda the other day. Having looked at it, my God. Yeah, okay, I'll cover it. So back in the unmarried residence, Frank comes in and just sort of like leaves the room after waking her up. And I mean, I guess maybe he's just leaving room for Jesus before leaving her in bed alone. Like, why did you walk into the room? This is like when you were younger and your parents would come into your room when you were like already asleep at 8:30 and they would wake you up and say it's time for bed. It's like, why did you do that? Let me sleep. I don't know, maybe your parents did that. Anywho, so the next morning they discuss how the lipid bilayer is breaking down. If they increase ionization, it'll fry the ion channels unless they add in a potassium inhibitor to reduce electrical impulses to 30 millisecond bursts, or they need to do that. So what does this even mean? Well, you know, I got you covered. So the lipid bilayer is really nothing more than a cellular membrane. Within a neuron, as with every cell, this is critical to keeping a cell viable and even giving it like a boundary so that it can function. When a cell dies, this layer will typically lyse, spilling its contents all around it. This apoptosis is actually very standard for a neuron, as the mitochondria will start to swell, which is also the powerhouse of the cell, and the cell itself begins to shrink. What should be known is that as a neuron shrinks, the dendritic connections that it has formed all throughout its life will be torn away, and this is critical to understanding what exactly the Lazarus serum is impacting. Once a neuron lyses, it's very unlikely you could force it back into being. In fact, you can't. It's gone. That's just it. Like, we have no technology to bring that back. However, not all neurons will lyse immediately. It just depends on what stage the person is in. Let's say you suffer from a massive stroke and flatline out. In the ensuing minutes, neurons will begin lysing and spilling their contents all around the area. As this happens, if you can get them to a freezer quick enough, you can at first slow the process and then eventually stop it if they're cooled down. But once they heat back up, the process will begin again. By injecting not only the serum, but a potassium inhibitor, this will stop the damage to the ion channels that exist within the cellular membrane. Effectively, what they seem to be trying to prevent is potassium from entering the neuron, breaking the potassium pumps. Potassium then rushes out of the cell with its electrochemical gradient, which then decreases the membrane potential, which allows for a neuron to actually enter a resting state. So this appears to be what they want to do, as too much potassium in the neuron would clearly damage it, considering the electrical shock they are about to send through the body. It happens that this shock may also provide the initial bump of energy to restart the brain, or whatever may still be left over, allowing for the heart to potentially restart momentarily, but it also should be understood that cardiac muscle is probably suffering as well. But moving the serum around, this allows for it to enter the brain in the first place and move past the blood-brain barrier. But first things first, they need to get at least some of the neurons that are functional, or at least could be functional, up and working again, even if by force, without damaging the neurons located near the electrical source, thus requiring the potassium inhibitor if they even want a chance at it. So as they move into the lab, McConnell then takes off her wedding ring and the cross before starting the pulses on the quadruped. They shock the dog and have no effect. Upping to 11 kilovolts, the quadruped still has no effect. Redhead then says, "Oh, I saw it move." They look at the dog regardless, as Glover gets his face way too close to it, like, ugh, God, that's creepy. The dog then jumps up, having its almonds reactivated, as they just brought it back from the dead. Not like from the brink, but full on, this thing was basically Old Yellard minus the spray and pray. Also, his cataracts are gone, which they've just cured blindness as well. I mean, what are you... Like, this thing apparently is just a cure-all, considering, like, it fixes cells that have undergone apoptosis, and I'm assuming repairs them as well. It all makes sense. Don't worry about it. The serum appears, like, again, not only to just affect neuronal proliferation, but in general, revitalizing cells, specifically the cuboidal epithelial cells within the eyes, allowing the cataracts apparently to go away. And this means proliferation would affect all parts of the body, which, at first may be good, but basically what you have done is given the whole body mega cancer. Nice going, doctor. Popping champagne, this is a huge breakthrough. They bring the dog back to their house, as Frank says he thinks the dog is just in shock and he needs to restitch those neural pathways. Yes, of course, that's how it works. No need to look into that any further. Thank you for your input. McConnell then poses the question, what if they ripped him out of doggy heaven or something? I'm gonna go with like pet cemetery rules on this one. The body is alive, but the soul is gone. Frank then says what they are doing, he's like, this could be considered questionable, but it'll help a lot of people. Yeah, this is one of those ethical questions. For instance, war and the technology that has come out of it has helped a lot of people undeniably, but how we got there, maybe not the best route to take. Always good to keep your moral compass though. So that night as McConnell sleeps with one of the tightest fitting sheets I've ever seen in my life, like, you ever notice in movies, nobody like sleeps with a blanket on? It's always just a sheet. Rocky comes to visit her, approaching slowly at first, and then he just sort of watches her. Angry that he was pulled from his eternal nap. I feel very similarly when I'm woken up from my naps. As they try to play with him the next day, he just sort of lays there depressed. You don't know it yet, but you're about to. Because of neuronal proliferation, his brain is growing and restructuring itself at an alarming rate. The dog becomes smarter and then immediately becomes depressed. If that's not an analogy for the human race, I don't know what it is. As they argue if the dogs actually have memories, or if they just use association somehow, like a memory isn't an association, they then discuss if the dog actually saw the white light. Frank says, oh, it's just the pineal gland that floods the body with DMT the moments before we die. Like, All right, Joe Rogan, calm down. Nobody knows why, as like, it is kind of an interesting concept. It's really just a big trip at the end, interestingly, but what are the implications of this? Because it's odd, so let's discuss that for a minute. So this may get a little philosophical, but it can come down to one question, as it always does. Why? Why is it when we meet our end, if it isn't like insanely quick, does our brain even have a reason to flood itself with DMT? In nature, adaptations exist to keep you alive and help you spread your genes. That is the whole reason they form in the first place. But how does an adaptation spring up from the exact opposite situation, allowing you to die? Let me present it this way. Let's say you're fighting a saber-toothed cat, right? You manage to take it out, but you are severely injured in the process. You crawl back to your cave where you bleed out, and the moment before the lights go out, your brain releases this DMT. This is not released while you were injured. It's not released while you were in the fight. It's not released at any point other than when you just are about to meet your end. So why is it when the brain starts to die, it shows up? A function specifically designed to help you seemingly die peaceful. But what purpose in nature would this serve? Death would be assured anyhow. In this process, it's not even necessary. Not having the DMT released would do nothing to help you survive or not survive. It just is. You can see why this is actually pretty baffling to a lot of biologists. Adaptations, again, help you survive. So how does an adaptation spring up to help you not survive? That in theory should be self-limiting, as it serves no purpose to be passed along. Either way, you die whether it is there or not. So think about that one for a minute. McConnell then says DMT is there to help the human soul move on. She argues the fact is we just don't know, which again is actually true. Again, as a biologist and scientist myself, I mean, you're not really here to, observe my opinion on the great beyond, but it kind of ties into this idea, so I'm ready for the fedora hate. I get a lot of people on this channel that get angry when I say I'm a science enjoyer, that I also believe in God, and with that, I also believe people can believe whatever they want to. It really does not affect me. But from my perspective, as with both sides, it's still just a belief. Almost, one could say, a form of faith. Do you believe that nothing happens after the lights go out? That's a belief, because there's only one way for you to really find out, and that's to experience it only for yourself. Do you believe that we go up into the sky or down below? Then that's a belief. The beauty is we really cannot quantify it in one way or the other, and pretty much anyone who says they know with 100% certainty, which will be somebody in the comments who gets angry that I brought this up, you're coping, bro. Because you don't know any more than anybody else. So all humans have doubts, no matter how strongly they seem to hold to one idea or the other. So basically, arrive at your own conclusion of what you think happens, and then carry yourself forward with that idea, and stop being so upset about it. So as they load the quadruped up into the MRI, they check his brain and find the serum is still present in his system, and there's a ton of activity in the brainstem as they talk about if the dog could be aggressive due to hypothyroidism. So they decide to leave the dog in the lab, as Horror Boy over here vapes in the dog's face. Okay, douche. Also, what these scientists listen to is completely lame. When I was in the lab, it was all AC/DC and Born in the USA, and before you ask, yes, the other scientists whined about it constantly, but whoever was in the lab first got to pick the music. Again, driver picks the music, shotgun shuts its cake hole. And for the love of all that is holy, one of them loved Taylor Swift, so objectively speaking, I had to obviously take control of the music, and it would have driven me to the brink of insanity. So as the music box is bumped, suspiciously, that's what happened to the speakers one morning when I came in. They had mysteriously been unplugged, like I couldn't have figured that out in 3 seconds. Classic. A can then rolls by as he walks into the kitchen and finds the fridge has been raided and the dog has escaped. He calls out to Rocky, he is hungry, he is coming. He hears a growl and then tells him, "You are freaking out, man." Pulling back the sheet, fake out, he was actually on top of the table. He then barks at him and for some reason just nopes out of there. All right, then Rocky is not happy, but he doesn't get attacked as the rest of the group shows up. And again, the hyperthyroidism aggression does seem plausible, but the food was on the top shelf. How did he get up there? Well, as we're gonna go find out, there's more at play here than just a dog standing on 2 legs rummaging for shredded cheese at 3 a.m. So later, Frank talks about how there are 3 phases with a bonus 4th phase. Reanimated is phase 1. Phase 2, the serum remains active in the bloodstream for way longer than they intended, and phase 3 is hormone disruption showing loss of appetite and confusion, which they label as hypothyroidism. This appears to be the point where there's a marked sign of aggression or some type of depression that is observed in the animal. But phase 4 results in the dog's brain creating even more neural pathways than what naturally exists in their species, which in theory might be a good idea to a certain extent, And like, why is this? Well, let's discuss the physical limitations of our own neurology just for a moment. As I have mentioned on this channel previously, our brains have physical limits to them, and with good reason. Being that our brains are fairly balanced, generalized thinking at this point is we may become limited by the actual physics associated with neuronal capacity. Let's say we doubled the amount of neurons within our skull and somehow didn't compress our brains into oblivion in the process. This would be very bad for us. First, the issue of heat generation is going to come into question. As these neurons fire and operate, they will produce greater and greater temperatures, which in turn could literally cook our brains if the cooling system was not capable of keeping up. And considering we're just talking about cellular growth and not the ventricles and spinal fluid changing in any great capacity, the cooling system is not really going to be overhauled. But let's say that we're able to keep our brains cool, then the issue becomes communication between neurons. There is only so fast that a signal can move through the brain. If you double the amount of neurons we presently have, this would mean everything would happen more slowly, or at least it would look like that to another person looking at another. Thinking may become more disjointed as a mess as far like the time a thought appears into our mind to like the action completed. The time will have doubled. While this may not seem like an issue in the present day, it does highlight that there are very real physical limitations to our brains and bodies. Now, this is not to say that our brains couldn't grow a little in size and we may become more intelligent and like sort of reap some new benefits of it, but a larger brain would be disastrous in our current state and could ultimately affect our ability to learn and apply knowledge to a situation if the tissue were to increase. In fact, one of the things that's always an interesting thought process that we kind of understand, I guess, collectively, not collectively, but a lot of people know in the science field is our brains can get a little bigger, but eventually we're going to have to intervene if we want to become even more intelligent, which some people suggest, or doctors and scientists or whatnot suggest, that may be basically the point that humans would become cyborgs, essentially, because we would need machines in order to allow for the organic portions of our brain to not be as affected by their own growth, in which case, as that process would continue, the more and more metallic machinery and circuits that are added into the body, we would reach the point where eventually the organic form would die, in which case we'd become Homo machinus. Now, does that mean we're going to go conquer Cyberstan and then start moving across the galaxy? Probably. But what we're about to see here in a moment, the serum continues to wreck face. The next day, they bring Rocky in as they're called over to the security desk as the dean needs to talk to Frank. He gets yelled at because he wasn't supposed to do this experiment. The donors are religious, as Frank is told he's playing God with a bunch of dead animals, which, I mean, I don't think preventing brain death is really playing God, but hey, if that's playing God, then vaccines are playing God and antibiotics are playing God. Because you gotta understand at some point it's okay for us to intervene on our own behalf. But he asks how she knows all of this and who fed her this information as, oh no, rip-off Umbrella Corp that showed up. They start loading all the research and the computers. Krylonis Pharma, they're known as, have showed up to basically steal the research, so they tell them they're getting shut down. As they discuss what they were working on back at the house because their lab was raided, they accuse the documentary chick of ratting them out. Frank says that they're going to duplicate the experiment before the company can reproduce it, and it'll prove that they had made it first. Luckily, McConnell stole some of the serum, like a lot of it, so the plan is to just break in, film their experiment to prove they did it first, have a beer, go home and celebrate. So that night, Redhead then walks past security as she's let in and then goes back to the delivery door to let in the others. Frank says, it's okay if you take off because you'll get expelled or worse, but she decides to help. It's gonna be an or worse. Getting to the labs, they then get started with the very little equipment that they have left, including, luckily enough, the bags of pigs and dogs. Starting the process on the new quadruped, they get the serum plugged in as they start the process over just like last time. They go to apply the gigawatts. As they trip the breakers, they get the lights turned back on and see Zoe was actually electrocuted. Her heart has stopped because of the jolt that she got. As they go to inject adrenaline into her and then use the defib, they shock her but get nothing. They then go up to 360 joules and get no response. Not an ideal situation. So she's pretty much done. It arced through her wedding ring as it appears she didn't take it off. Oopsie doopsies, we made a big fucky wucky. Well, you do have the cure for death behind you, my man, but is it really ready for human testing? Absolutely not, but don't worry about that because we're doing it live. Frank then puts her on the table as the team tries to talk him out of it, but his mind is made up. The team agrees to stay as they let Redhead pull the switch this time. Ah yes, use the intern. Just make sure you take off any and all rings. Stabbing McConnell in the head, they then start the process of reviving her. Upping it to 13 kilovolts, it doesn't appear to work. They then look at the camera and see that the guard is gone. He's on his way to check on the lab. They pull out the Dead Space 2 needle and all start hiding. The guard then goes past as Frank goes to check, and as he does, he turns around and sees, oh good lord, McConnell is back up, but not appearing like a normal person. I mean, technically, that does happen to bodies sometimes in like crematoriums. They will sit up and move, which is pretty freaking disturbing. So as Frank approaches, he pulls back the sheet and looks at her. She seems a little out of it. Frank says, well, she's in shock. Now man, I think you just created a zombie. McConnell then grabs Frank's arm and asks him, did I just die? Why, yes you did. Welcome back to the suck known as life. He checks her vitals to make sure that she's like responsive and appears good to go. Keyword being appears. They start asking her what it was like and ask her, did she see anything? Oh, you know, just distant screams and nightmares, the usual things when people close their eyes. So now that the miracle of life has been completely reversed, they load Zoe up into an MRI to do a scan. They see that something is not quite right. They find that she has too much neural activity, but also her body is completely healed. The serum has not dissipated in the dog, and it doesn't seem to be dissipating in her either. Her whole brain is lit up, and this is what we in the business like to call a seizure. Zoe asks about going to the hospital, which would probably be a pretty good idea, but Frank says, nah, you're fine. I'm more qualified. Frank, I don't believe you've ever been to medical school. Actually, he has. To be doing these experiments, he would have to go to medical school. So, a few things. First, and this is me asking you, why would they think that the serum based on B-cell cancers is actually going to dissipate? It's a cancer. While B-cell cancer is highly treatable, the reality is the serum would not just be disappearing in the body. They don't even know if there are factors that would remove it. So this highlights a problem. First, they're all huge nerds that didn't think about this, but having a serum that you have no way to force dissipate that grows neurons and increases arborization of dendritic portions of a neuron means that those neurons will keep dividing and making connections, leading to the aforementioned issue of the brain slowing down. Because I don't know if I mentioned this, but if the brain forms too many connections between neurons, this will have the same impact and slow it down. However, for a time, this would likely cause a person to become more intelligent, as we will see, and potentially even induce abilities that have not been observed in humanity. Well, some of them have, but we'll kind of get there with that. It seems they are missing a critical piece of medication in their arsenal, the ability to actually destroy the serum once it's done its job. Because as it's allowed to remain in the body, it will continue causing the brain to grow, which eventually would be catastrophic. Think about basically being overhealed. At a certain point, it really just becomes cancer as your body continues to have cells divide as spurred on by the B-cell cancer due to hormone signals going completely out of control. So giving Zoe back her cross, he added the ring to it. She laughs as she puts it on, but she recoils, asking him what he just said as the pen moves on the table. So this highlights something rather interesting. She had to get very, very close to him where she thought she heard something that he said. She then completely says what he was going to say, which freaks him out even more. He goes outside, leaving her in the lounge as she smiles like a total weirdo before seeing the pen move on the table once more. Looking at it, it seems like maybe she's moving it. She also has better hearing and horrifically has tinnitus. She can now read minds, as it seems. As she looks at her fingers though, there appears to be a circulatory system issue as she touches water, but all it does is inspire pain in her, so that kind of sucks. But here we can see a margin of brain growth that may be beneficial to humanity, and this is the ability to read minds. This may indicate that the serum has begun affecting the mirror neurons specifically within the brain, which have shown that to a degree they can be affected by electromagnetic fields. With the normal human brains putting off these fields like we do every single day, she's able to look at them at first, and then those are rapidly dividing in her head and she can hear them in her own mind. It may also be possible that the temporal lobe of the brain responsible for auditory discernment has grown substantially, allowing again for her to hear everyone as they are whispering in the other room. This would clearly show that the hair cells also in her ears have increased in number, allowing for sound waves to be detected that most humans could not hear. And I'm actually inclined to believe both based on what we will see. As she looks at the wound on her temple, she pulls back the band-aid before seeing the blood is black and coagulated. The mirror randomly then breaks as she sees her face, but also not her face. She turns around as the quadruped is growling at her and the dog yelps, and that's about it. Viewing the cells under a microscope, they do appear destroyed. As Frank continues his research, Zoe then comes up to him and she says, "I think something's wrong," before throwing up a bunch of white stuff. What is that? Is that the serum? It doesn't really say what that is. So she says that she's changing and tells him to look at her hand, which is now completely normal. So it appears visual hallucinations are likely present, but it may be possible that given the massive overall of healing in her system, anything that was at first damaged has now been fully healed. Also, I mean, your brain has had its almonds activated to the 10th degree, so it would make sense that you would be having quite a bit of issues interpreting anything that you see. It is later said hilariously at this point that we only use 10% of our brains, which is actually a myth, but they kind of save it by saying, no, we only use 10% at a given time. The number can actually be as high as 35%, but Zoe appears to be using 100% of her brain, and the entire time, somehow, is not laying on the floor convulsing in a tonic-clonic seizure. So now she says that she went somewhere when she died, a burning building. Frank tells her, oh, it was just a dream. She says, well, I tried to wake up, but I couldn't, and every day it was the same thing over and over again, and she tells him it's been years despite only being gone for an hour. He tries to tell her that it must have been the DMT, which again, the issue with DMT is after a few minutes, like post-release, there's nothing for it to really act on, so after an hour, you are no longer interpreting the effects of DMT and what it may be doing. She then says, no, I went to hell, which, isn't she like a Catholic? Like that seems like a bit of a ripoff. So Frank calms her down and then gives her something to make her go to sleep. So Redhead covers her up while she's sleeping as she's having a ton of rapid eye movement indicating intense dreaming, which also indicates the brain is trying to work through something. But she doesn't cover her feet, which again is gonna give her nightmares, which actually, fun fact, if you don't cover your feet while you sleep, this is known to increase the frequency of nightmares. As Intern turns around though, she's transported into Zoe's dream. She calls out to Frank and Zoe but sees no one. She goes to open the door and sees a bunch of hands underneath it. Turning around, she sees an offspring in the middle of the hallway. She calls to her and asks where they are, but the youngling appears to just stay quiet and then turns the lights off. Redhead then sees a figure as well as burning in what appears to be a giant acid trip, but it was really just her knocked unconscious. Waking up, she tells the team what happened. She says that she was somewhere else. Is Zoe screwing with her own DMT? Who knows? She was in a building with a youngling and a fire which then disturbs Frank. So it appears though visual projection of images in a field of influence which can be transferred to other people. The question is how? We have moved past the point where mirror neurons simply pick up electromagnetic fields from other people's brains, and we have now moved on to a field of influence that Zoe is projecting that forces the brains of others to fire in a similar way as to her brain and how it would be firing. This effectively causes them to see what she sees. Visual implantation is the best way to kind of discuss this. Her arm also has wounds on it where she got grabbed, which says something else is going on. Like this would imply that like the Matrix, if you get injured or die in the Matrix, you get injured or die in real life. So that means her own brain would have to be making this a reality. They then ask Frank what's going on, like he would know, as he tells everyone, well, this is a nightmare that Zoe has lived through when she was younger. So they ask how that's even possible, but now we already know potentially why this has to happen. So Ava asks maybe the door couldn't have been opened so Zoe's soul can't move on as a result. Frank then asks Glover to help as he walks away angry, and with Eva freaked out, Clay says it must be the serum unlocking parts of her brain that has allowed her to basically have psychic abilities. Millions of years of evolution happening in minutes. So as they continue their search for info, they find a dummy account that has been there for months that downloads all of their data onto one of their computers. They realize that they were hacked by Cryolanus, and it was updated only 30 minutes ago, so now they know they're there. They go to gather the dog and get Zoe out of there so that they don't get caught doing all this. And Zoe, meanwhile, is having the same nightmare over and over again like when she was stuck in hell. Great times. She starts levitating off the couch as one does, as her eyes turn completely black. And here we're starting to tread the line between science and knowledge, even if this is what's out there or what the body may in the future be capable of, and kind of start treading into, is this just straight up demonic possession? To answer that, it's actually a fairly simple question that can be used to explain this, or an idea anyways. If you transported a medieval peasant to the current era and turned on a TV with a remote, they would think you just performed magic, and magic, as we all know, is supernatural. They would also think like the TV show or TV is a window to an area that is beyond comprehension. The reality is, as far as our species is concerned, we tend to look at things that we don't understand as supernatural. So what if there are things out there that are as natural as you or I that exist and behave in ways which have been documented by our species prior that we really just relegated to supernatural because we haven't seen it lately? Or maybe it operates under our nose, but we just have no way to detect it. Sort of like gravity waves oscillating the very fabric of our reality when two black holes collide, yet as far as we know, nothing changed and we feel no different from it. We just simply do not know enough about the reality that we live in to make any definitive stances either way. So if you really think about it, good Lord, this whole existence thing is a complete unknown, and the meat in our heads are just constantly trying to figure it out, possibly what is even happening and why we are even a thing. So it's very difficult Again, things are relegated into the supernatural aspect, but all supernatural has been in the past for human history is just normal things that we know. We're like, oh yeah, that's totally how things work. So in the future, odds are we probably will figure out that things are supernatural, they're just natural. So Glover goes to investigate as he sees that she's gone. He calls out to her and then hears a noise. Heading into the MRI room, the lights are flickering. She sneaks up behind him as she tells him she wants him to make her feel normal. She gets way too close for comfort and then starts making out with him. Would Frank approve? Well, maybe, because he's married to his work. She starts saying exactly what he was going to say, which freaks him out a little bit. And now Zoe is pissed about ending up in hell, as it didn't seem like she deserved it, but then she completely loses the driver's seat as her eyes go black once more. And this looks like just a straight up possession. Time to break out the cross and start smiting some demons like the absolute punk asses that they are. Glover then gets blasted back into a cabinet as she begins collapsing it, crushing him in the process. Well then, that sucks. So as far as we know, telekinesis would involve something besides just our brains influencing electromagnetic fields. This would involve the literal manipulation of space around us simply by using our brains. And this would have to tap into something completely unknown to us as a species. So the rest of the team comes in, they realize they can't find Nico anywhere. Clay says he's calling security. Frank and Clay argue as the power then goes out as Clay goes to call. Eva then asks if this happens often, as Clay says the phones never go dead, they are on a different system. The power can go out, but the phones don't. It just doesn't happen. So they now need to get out of there, but everything is locked down tight. So Ava sits there doing absolutely nothing as Zoe keeps staring at her. Zoe then says she's not wrong for thinking she never belonged here. She's just being a complete turd in the punch bowl at this point. So they come back in as Ava asks what Zoe did. Ava accuses Zoe of being the last person to see Nico as a serum did something to her brain. Clay then yells at her as she, just throws something in his throat and then winks at him. Frank then goes in with the forceps and pulls out the flashlight. And you could probably get him up and moving. He just dropped. Cardiac thump inbound, but the brain has about 2 minutes of good viable oxygen. Like I said, you could probably bring him back. So the power now goes out as Zoe disappears. 100% get the salt at this point. She appears behind him as now she has the whole room floating. Well, that's not ideal. The power then goes out as they have a ton of furniture thrown at them. Waking up an unspecified amount of time later, Frank goes to get Ava up as Zoe is now loose somewhere in the building. I guess that's why the dead should stay dead, am I right? Going to the medicine cabinet, they get basically what they use to put down animals to take this gal out. As they turn around, the morgue is all moving as they spot bodies which have been pulled out of their resting area, which, why were those down here? One then sits up scaring the absolute hell out of them as Ava starts freaking out. Frank then pulls out a dose in order to take out Zoe, but he needs Ava to hide in case he can't succeed. She needs to pick up where he left off. So Frank begins the worst game of hide and seek ever, and looking down the hallway, he sees a woman crying. He calls out to her, but she doesn't turn around. Yeah, man, those signals aren't looking too good. Approaching that thing is about as safe as barebacking a $5 hooker. She appears next to him and asks what he has in the syringe. So, like a total idiot, he puts it down and tries to reason with her. He apologizes and says, I can fix this. Like, bro, the lights are on, but Marilyn Manson is home. So she asks if he still loves her as she mind melds with him, and as she reads his mind, her eyes turn black, and then she can hear that he was trying to take her out with a syringe, like why else would he have the syringe? So she starts squeezing his head and yelling. Bro, I think you created a wraith actually. She pushes in his head, causing massive internal hemorrhaging as he meets his end, and she walks down the hallway casually, leaving Ava to finish the job. Heading into the serum room, Zoe then starts pumping all of that stuff into her head, completely changing her. Ava then decides to go with the same plan in order to take her out because it worked really well the first time. Good luck with that one, gal. So you're now dealing with a roided up brain nerd, and as she gets ready, she can hear Zoe calling out to her, and oh sweet hell, that is horrifying. Grabbing the flashlight, she looks for Zoe, and really, this isn't even fair. Using your brain in that capacity is cheating, and I'm gonna die on that hill. This is like picking a fight with a house cat. So seeing her walk through the area, opera music then starts playing again. See? So she was the villain, but only after she was brought back. Entering the room, she stops the record player before finding a body on the ground. She calls out to Zoe again as a ball rolls by. Also a little sadistic, I suppose. Calling out to Zoe for another time, she then grabs a syringe out of her boot and gets ready to step to Zoe in the face, Dead Space 2 style. Getting jump scared though, Zoe has gone full demon as Ava is blasted back into the nightmare with Zoe. Ava closes the door, choosing hell over that thing. Maybe not a great plan, and looking over, Ava then calls out to smaller Zoe. Looking at her hand, she spots that she has matches. It was Zoe that caused the fire, and when I was like a youngling, I burned down my clubhouse with my brothers as we were playing with matches. It does happen. So at this point, the door blasts open as older Zoe comes in. Ava tells Zoe it's not your fault, and I mean it sort of is, but you were a youngling, so I mean, how much knowledge did you really have of the world? As Ava tells her to go and open the door before older Zoe gets to them. Zoe then opens it up as light floods in as Zoe's soul is yeeted into wherever souls go, as Zoe apologizes as Ava hits her with the syringe, again taking her out for good. So you're telling me all Zoe had to do was open a door and she spent years in a hallway because she wouldn't open it. Bruh. So Ava sits there as the fire department shows up to help her as she's like, oh, Zoe took everyone out. But as she does, she realizes, oh crap, Zoe's gone. But did Ava actually survive? Well, it would seem no, she did not, because Ava gets her neck snapped like a chicken leg as the whole team has now shuffled their mortal coil because they decided to bring someone back. In doing so, Zoe then starts bringing everyone back because, why not? So the Lazarus serum, in theory, is actually exceptional if properly used. It would appear that the main issue that it stems from is like the foundation of its functionality. They use cancerous B cells to cause neuronal proliferation, which could bring a person back from, extensive brain damage that was caused, but it cannot be assumed that the body would just deal with these cancerous levels. Medications would need to be administered to halt the process before problems. Like, with a team just experienced, those are going to arise. To this end, a lower dose may need to be given, which allows for slower neuronal proliferation, which less cancerous B cells, which in turn could allow for any medications given to work more effectively and not let the brain continue just to grow unchecked. But unfortunately, they use a whole freaking bag of the stuff causing the problems that they had. And this is kind of what causes the telekinesis and the mind reading abilities. With the dog, the way it was able to get up on the counter is it didn't get up on the counter at all. It was a psychic dog that had telekinesis in its ability to do so. But what I find interesting about all of this is the concept of death itself and then humans moving on. Basically, this kind of seems like a more corporeal version of what happens after we die. In the ethereal version, our souls move on, but our bodies stay behind. And then you kind of achieve these things supposedly anyways. But with the corporeal version, you still have your body. So it's, I think, kind of a play on the fact that the reason she starts bringing everybody after death is because sort of like how you move to the afterlife, you have to die first, right? But to move into this new evolutionary future, you have to die first. It's kind of a similar thing, but would this work? I mean, it kind of seems like it could be a good thing for the human race as long as we didn't just turn completely sociopathic. But with Zoe, it kind of seems like maybe she did. But then again, she's so much more intelligent than every other human that it may just be like, well, you guys aren't going to listen anyways at this point, that I can bring you into like a new being, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do it and then bring you back regardless. So it's sort of like, I'm here to rescue you, do not resist sort of scenario. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like would be fantastic of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I also want to hear what you guys think. Do you think it was just like undiscovered abilities in the brain, or was it just straight up possession, given that the soul would likely no longer be inhabiting her body, considering the soul moved on in hell? Let me know down in the comments. I probably already said this, but I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and Roanoke Tales channel link, where we talked about the lost cosmonauts that allegedly a pair of brothers had heard on their radio in the 1960s. It didn't turn out well for them. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, huge thank you to our astronaut, Ron Burgundy. Thank you, sir. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Des Dancer, as well as our scientist, Chad the Enjoyer of scientific explanations of B-grade horror movies, Dakota 23, Jax, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, Trash Panda in the Trench Coat. And the rest of my patrons, I thank you guys as well. Your help goes a long way towards keeping everything running and is greatly appreciated. All right, so that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.